The mist that clings to the hollows of Mingo County doesn't just obscure the trees. It seems to mute the world completely. It wraps the small towns along the Tug Fork River in a thick blanket of ancient secrets and heavy silence. It was late October in 1970, and the damp air already carried the sharp, biting promise of a hard winter coming soon. The leaves were turning the color of rusted iron and dried tobacco, falling on the streets forever dusted with gray powder. For Caleb Thorne, the changing seasons were marked not by the calendar, but by the production quotas of the burning rock beneath. There was only the darkness down below and the gray light up above, day after day. Caleb was 32 years old, a man built from the same stubborn geology as the Appalachian Mountains themselves. He had shoulders broadened by 12 years of swinging a sledge, and hands that were permanently stained with coal dust worked deep into the calluses. He was a quiet man, the kind who spoke only when the words were absolutely necessary for the task at hand. This was a trait learned in the echo chamber of the mines, where a shouted warning meant life or death. He lived a life of solitude in a small clapboard house at the end of a gravel road. His only company were the ghosts of his father and grandfather, both of whom had died with black lungs in service to the company. But that Tuesday night was different, for the annual Harvest Festival was taking place in the gymnasium of the high school. It was a rare explosion of color and noise in a town that usually operated in hushed tones. Caleb hadn't intended to go, having just come off a 10-hour shift at the No. 4 seam. His body hummed with a bone-deep fatigue that felt like gravity had doubled its pull, dragging his heavy boots against the pavement. His sister, Martha, had insisted he attend, claiming he was turning into a hermit who smelled like sulfur and old coffee. So he washed, scrubbed his face until it was raw, and put on his best blue flannel shirt. He walked down the hill toward the lights of the school, feeling the cold wind on his neck. The gymnasium smelled of floor wax, hot apple cider, and the heavy perfume of the older ladies from the Baptist choir. A local bluegrass band was playing on a makeshift stage, the banjo picking out a rhythm that sounded like rain on a tin roof. Caleb stood near the back, holding a paper cup of punch, feeling too large for the room. He watched the couples spinning on the floor, the miners in their clean shirts. He felt that familiar pang of isolation, a creature of the dark, uncomfortable in the bright fluorescent lights of the gathering. He was about to turn and leave, to retreat back to the safety of his porch and his silence. But then he saw her standing by the table where the pies were being judged by the elders. Her name was Elena Vance, the new librarian who had moved back to Mingo County from Lexington recently. She didn't look like the women Caleb was used to seeing in town, wearing a yellow dress that seemed to hold its own light. There was a softness to her, a grace in the way she moved her hands as she spoke to the preacher, but her eyes held a spark of steel that suggested she knew how to weather a storm. When she laughed, the sound cut through the drone of the crowd and the banjo music. It rang clear and true, like a silver bell in a deep cavern, striking a chord deep within Caleb's tired chest. Caleb found himself paralyzed, his heavy boots feeling as if they were nailed to the gymnasium floorboards. He watched her for what felt like an hour, entranced by the way the light caught her brown curls. Eventually, the crowd shifted, and for a moment there was a clear line of sight between them. Elena looked up, her gaze drifting across the room until it landed on him, holding his stare without flinching. She didn't offer the polite, pitying smile that most people gave the bachelor miners in this town. Instead, she offered a look of genuine curiosity, a slight tilt of her head asking who he was. He took a step forward, driven by an instinct he didn't recognize, maneuvering through the crowd. When he finally reached the table, his throat felt dry, choked with the phantom dust of the mine, making it hard to speak. Elena smiled then, a warm, inviting expression that made his heart hammer against his ribs like a jackhammer. She offered him a slice of apple pie on a napkin, bridging the gap between his world and hers. "You look like a man who's carried the weight of the world today," she said softly. "I'm Elena, and I think you need something sweet to take the taste of the coal out of your mouth." Caleb took the pie, his rough fingers brushing against her smooth skin, feeling a jolt of electricity pass between them. "I'm Caleb," he managed to rasp out, his voice deeper than the music playing. "And you might be right." In that moment, surrounded by the noise of the festival, the darkness felt miles away. It was the beginning of a shift he hadn't seen on the schedule, a descent into something far more terrifying. The courtship of Caleb Thorne and Elena Vance was a slow, deliberate thing. Like carving a tunnel through sandstone, it had to be handled with care, shored up with patience, and built to withstand pressure. Caleb's life was dictated by the whistle of the mine, working the swing shift between days and nights. His sleep came in fitful bursts of 3 or 4 hours, yet he always found time for Elena. They couldn't go to fancy restaurants, for there were none in Mantuan, and Caleb's paycheck was largely spoken for. He paid the mortgage on his family home and for the endless repairs on his truck. Instead, their romance unfolded in the quiet spaces of the Appalachian landscape on Sunday afternoons. They would drive up to the fire tower on Buffalo Mountain, sitting on the tailgate of his rusted truck. They drank coffee from a thermos, watching the hawks ride the thermals over the scarred ridgelines below. Elena would talk about her books, about the worlds that existed beyond the hollers of West Virginia. She told stories of Paris, of ancient Rome, of oceans so blue they looked like the sky. Caleb would listen, entranced, his mind painting vivid pictures in the soot that coated his imagination, dreaming of places he would never see. In return, he taught her the language of the mountains, showing her how to identify a hickory tree. He showed her how to spot the signs of a deer trail winding through the brush. Reluctantly, he explained the mechanics of his work, detailing the room and pillar method and the danger of methane. He tried to sanitize it, to leave out the fear, but Elena was smart enough to see the truth. She saw the way his hands shook slightly before he lit a cigarette, a tremor of exhausted nerves. She noticed the way he would sometimes stare off into the middle distance, listening for a roof groan. One evening in November, after Caleb had pulled a double shift to cover for a sick friend, he arrived at Elena's house. He was still wearing his work clothes, the raccoon rings of coal dust around his eyes marking him. He stood on her porch, feeling filthy and intrusive, ready to apologize and leave her be. But Elena opened the door, took one look at his exhausted slump, and pulled him inside immediately. She didn't care about the grime on his boots or the smell of sweat and machinery. She sat him down at her kitchen table and made him soup, her presence washing over him like a warm bath. "You work too hard, Caleb," she said, tracing a scar on his forearm with her thumb gently. It was a jagged white line where a piece of slate had sliced him years ago. "The mountain doesn't care if you kill yourself for it. It will just take the next man in line." Her words were soft but heavy with a truth that Caleb had tried to ignore for years. "It's what I know, Caleb replied, his voice heavy with the weight of generations of miners. "My daddy did it." His daddy did it. It puts food on the table. It's honest work. He looked at his hands, ashamed of the dirt that seemed permanently etched into his skin. He wanted to offer her more, but this was the only currency he had to trade for a life. "It's dangerous work," she countered gently, pouring him a glass of water from the tap. "I see the way the older men walk in this town, wheezing and bent over. They carry oxygen tanks, like they're carrying their own tombstones, waiting for the end. I don't want that for you. I don't want to fall in love with a man, only to watch him fade away by 50. The word love hung in the air, heavy and sweet, the first time either had said it. Caleb looked at her, at the concern etched into her brow, and felt a surge of emotion. He reached out, taking her hand in his, the contrast of his scarred skin against her softness striking. "I ain't gonna fade away, Elena. I'm tough. I'm careful, and now I got a reason to come back." But the reality of the mine was a jealous mistress that demanded all of his attention. As winter deepened, the demand for coal spiked, and the energy crisis was still fresh. The company pushed for higher tonnage, and safety inspections became rushed formalities to keep the belts moving. Caleb found himself spending more time underground than above it, missing dates and falling asleep during the few movies they watched. The physical toll began to manifest in a persistent cough that woke him up at night. He developed a limp from a twisted knee he refused to report to the shift boss. The tension between his duty to the mine and his devotion to Elena began to fray them. She wanted him to look for other work, perhaps at the lumber yard or the mechanic shop in Williamson. But those jobs paid half of what the mine did, and Caleb had a rigid pride. He wanted to provide for her, to give her a life where she didn't worry about money. He didn't understand that all she wanted was him, whole and safe, not a paycheck. The dance of duty was becoming a wrestling match, and Caleb was terrified that he was losing his footing completely. The breaking point arrived in late January, brought on by a cold snap that froze the ground. The mine manager, a man named Henderson who cared more for spreadsheets, ordered the crews to dig. They were to open up a new section in the gamble for a rich vein of coal. The geological surveys for the section were spotty, indicating potential sandstone washouts, but the order came down regardless. Caleb had a bad feeling about it from the moment they trammed the continuous miner inside. The air felt heavy, stagnant, and the rock dusting on the walls seemed to absorb the light. He mentioned it to his foreman, Big John, but was told to just keep an eye out. Elena had sensed his unease that morning, grabbing his arm with a grip that was surprisingly strong and desperate. "Don't go today, Caleb. Call in sick, please," she begged, her eyes wide with fear. "I had a dream. It was dark, and I couldn't find you. Just stay home." Caleb pulled away gently, kissing her forehead. "I can't, Elle. The boys are counting on me. If I don't go, they run short-handed, and that's when accidents happen. I have to go to keep them safe." 6 hours into the shift, the incident happened. Not an explosion, but something more insidious. Caleb was operating the shuttle car, moving a load of coal from the face to the belt line. He was navigating the tight turns of the crosscut when he heard the sound above him. It was a sharp, cracking pop, like a rifle shot, followed by the terrifying groan of strata shifting under pressure. A section of the roof, the size of a pickup truck, delaminated from the layers above. It was a kettle bottom, a fossilized tree stump inherent in the rock, unpredictable and deadly. It crashed down just feet from where Caleb sat in the open cab of the shuttle car. The impact shook the ground violently, throwing Caleb sideways, his helmet slamming hard against the steel frame of the car. He woke up in the back of the company ambulance, the siren wailing a mournful song. His head throbbed with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat, and his left arm was completely numb. But he was alive, the doctors at Williamson Memorial Hospital confirming a severe concussion and dislocated shoulder. He was lucky, they said, inches to the right, and he would have been nothing but a memory. Elena arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, her face pale and her hair disheveled. She burst into the room, ignoring the nurses, and collapsed into the chair beside his bed. She didn't cry immediately. She just stared at him, at the blood on his forehead. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and trembling with a mixture of relief and a furious, burning anger. "I heard the siren," she said, her hands gripping the bedsheet until her knuckles turned white. "I was in the middle of a lesson, and I heard the siren from the mine. I knew. I just knew it was you. I can't do this, Caleb. I can't sit in that classroom every day, wondering if the next siren is the one that takes you away for good." "I'm all right, Caleb croaked, reaching for her hand with his good arm, trying to soothe her. "Just a bump. I'll be back on my feet in a week. It's part of the job." She pulled her hand away as if he had burned her. No, Caleb. It's not just a bump. It's a warning. I can't build a life on a foundation that might collapse. "I'm saying I love you," she said, her voice breaking as the tears finally spilled over. "I love you more than I thought I could love anyone. But I can't watch you die by degrees. You have to choose, Caleb. The mine or us. If you go back down that hole, I can't stay. I won't stay and watch them bring you home in a box." Sis stood up, kissed him softly on the cheek, a kiss that felt terrifyingly like goodbye. She walked out of the room, leaving him in the sterile white light of the hospital. Caleb lay there, the smell of antiseptic burning his nose, feeling more alone than he ever had. The ultimatum hung in the air, a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed down on his chest harder than the rock. The weeks following the accident were a blur of physical therapy and an agonizing, heavy silence. Elena kept her distance, bringing casseroles to his porch and leaving them with a polite note. She wouldn't see him, giving him space to make his choice, but the silence was torture. Caleb's shoulder healed, but his heart remained an open wound that refused to close, bleeding a little more each day. The doctor cleared him for work in mid-February, and the decision was finally upon him. He went back, telling himself it was just for a little while longer to pay bills. He told himself Elena would understand, that she was bluffing. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was returning because he was afraid of the unknown, afraid of a life where he wasn't a miner. The shift started normally, the crew welcoming him back with slaps on the back and jokes. The smell of the coal dust felt like coming home, a familiar comfort in the chaos. But 2 hours in, the atmosphere changed as a massive winter storm raged above ground. The power lines feeding the ventilation fans and the elevator hoist were old and brittle, buckling under the ice. Suddenly, the mine plunged into absolute, total blackness as the main power failed completely. The backup generators for the fans kicked on for a moment, then sputtered and died out. The hum of the machinery, The lifeblood of the mine vanished, replaced by a suffocating silence. It was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. The kind of silence that you can feel pressing against your eardrums in the dark. Cap lamps on low. Big John's voice boomed in the dark, trying to maintain order. "Conserve your batteries. We're walking out." But they couldn't walk out, for the power failure had tripped the brakes. The safety brakes on the man-trip cars had engaged, blocking the main haulage way completely. And worse, the phone lines to the surface were dead, severed by the storm of the falling rock. They were 3 miles deep, trapped in the dark, with no way to know anything. They didn't know if help was coming or if the storm had buried the entrance. They gathered in a crosscut, 10 men sitting on the cold floor, their lamps cutting weak cones. The hours dragged on, and the air grew stale and warm as the ventilation stopped moving the fresh oxygen. Caleb sat apart from the others, his back against a rib of hard, cold coal. He turned off his lamp to save the battery, letting the darkness wrap around him tight. In that sensory deprivation, his mind projected images with vivid clarity, playing out his fears. He saw his father, coughing his life away in a recliner, unable to catch his breath or speak. He saw the empty house that awaited him, the dust motes dancing in the silent rooms. And then he saw Elena, laughing at the festival in her bright yellow dress. He saw her teaching him the names of the wildflowers on the ridge, her eyes shining. He saw the look of terror in her eyes at the hospital, the plea for him to choose life. He realized, with a clarity that cut through him like a laser, that the mine didn't love him. The coal didn't care if he lived or died. It was just rock, cold and dead. The only warmth in his life, the only thing that made the struggle meaningful, was her. He thought about the legacy of the miner, the pride of the hard work and the sacrifice. But what was the point of the legacy if there was no one to share it? What was the point of providing for a future if he wasn't there to live it? He realized that his stubbornness wasn't strength. It was fear of changing who he was. In the crushing dark, with the oxygen thinning, Caleb made a promise to the void and to himself. "If I get out of here," he thought, "I'm done. I'm choosing the light." He took a piece of chalk from his pocket used for marking roof. Boltzand wrote. On the wall, it was a message for her, in case the air ran out before the rescue. "Elena, you were right. You are my light. I love you." He sat back, closing his eyes, and waited. It was 18 hours before the power was restored and the fans roared back to life. The ventilation pulled the stale air out and pushed fresh, freezing winter air down the shaft. The man-trip cars were reset, and the slow journey to the surface began for the men. The ride out was silent, the men exhausted, shaken, and grateful to be breathing fresh air again. As the car ascended the slope, the pinprick of daylight at the mouth grew larger. It was gray and dim. It was late afternoon the next Abbat. It looked like heaven. The mine yard was full of people, families huddled around burn barrels in the snow. When the first group of miners stepped off the man-trip, a cheer went up that echoed off the hills. Wives ran to husbands, children to fathers, the relief palpable in the frosty air. Caleb stepped onto the frozen ground, his legs shaking from exhaustion and the release of tension. He scanned the crowd, his heart pounding, ignoring the foreman who was trying to check names. The snow was falling softly now, covering the black grime of the yard in a pure blanket of white. And then he saw her, standing near the gate, wrapped in a thick wool coat. Her face was pale and drawn from a night of sleepless waiting. Her eyes read. She saw him, and for a moment she didn't move, just searched his face for the answer. Caleb didn't walk toward the locker room to check out or sign his time card for the shift. He walked straight to her, stopping a foot away, the snow falling gently between them. He looked like a ghost, covered in dust, his eyes rimmed with red fatigue. "I wrote you a letter," he said, his voice raspy from the bad air and the thirst. "Down there, on the wall, in the dark." Elena stepped closer, her breath hitching. "What did it say?" "It said I'm done," Caleb said, unclipping his brass ID tag from his belt. This was the tag every miner carries to identify their body, the symbol of his trade. He placed it in her hand, closing her fingers over the cold metal. "I'm done, El. I'm choosing you." Elena let out a sob that was half laugh, half cry, and threw her arms around his neck. She buried her face in his soot-stained jacket, holding him tight enough to fuse their bones. Caleb held her, looking over her shoulder at the dark mouth of the mine. He felt a pang of sadness, a farewell to the life he had known for so long. But it was drowned out by the warmth of the woman in his arms and the life ahead. He looked at the mine entrance one last time, whispering a quiet goodbye to the dark. They walked away from the tipple, hand in hand, leaving footprints in the fresh snow. Behind them, the machinery groaned and the conveyor belts hummed, continuing their endless, hungry work. But Caleb didn't look back. He had found a new vein of gold, and he wasn't letting go. 10 years later, the landscape of Mingo County had changed, as it always does. The boom had busted, the mine where Caleb worked was closed, and the entrance sealed. The tipple was rusting into a skeleton of orange steel against the green hills, forgotten by time. But on the outskirts of town, there was a new sign swaying gently in the breeze. E3 Thorne's woodworking and cabinetry, painted in bright, cheerful letters on a wooden board. Inside the workshop, the air didn't smell of sulfur and methane, but of cedar and varnish. Caleb stood at a workbench, planing a piece of cherry wood with steady, practiced hands. He was 42 now, the gray in his beard matching the gray at his temples. But he was healthy. He didn't have the miner's cough, though his knees still ached when it rained hard. The door to the shop opened, and a boy of 8 ran in, carrying a backpack. "Daddy, Mummy says dinner is ready," the boy shouted, his voice full of energy. Caleb smiled, putting down his plane and wiping the sawdust from his hands. "All right, Sammy. I'm coming." Elena stood in the doorway, older now, but with that same steel and softness. She watched her husband and son, a look of quiet contentment on her face. She looked at Caleb's hands, still strong and calloused, but clean of the black stain. The coal dust was gone, replaced by the honest sawdust of a craftsman creating things that lasted. Caleb walked over to her, kissing her with a lingering affection that spoke of gratitude. "You finished that table?" she asked, brushing a stray wood shaving from his shoulder. "Almost," he said. "Just needs a little more polish, and it will be ready for the varnish." They walked out of the shop together, Caleb locking the door behind them for the night. The sun was setting over the ridge, casting a golden light over the peaceful valley. It was the same sun that had set over the mine all those years ago. But now, Caleb didn't dread the coming night or the crushing weight of the earth above. He knew that even in the dark, he would never be lost again, for he had kept his promise. He had survived the depths to live in the light with the woman he loved. He had proven that while coal might power the world, love was the only thing that could power a life. As they walked toward their home, the lights in the window glowing warmly, Caleb Thorne was finally free. The mine was a memory, but the love was a living thing.